I'm cold. I can't lie. I think Peter said it at the beginning. Sorry, my name's Ian Kamau. I'm an artist, a writer, and a designer. What's up? So I think Peter said it. Were we ever connected in the first place? I never considered myself to be part of the arts sector. And so I'm not really going to speak from that perspective. I always wanted to be an artist. It's the only thing that I ever wanted to do. I believe that artists are connectors. They are connectors of ideas, of experiences, of histories, of stories, of audiences, of communities, and of people. I think artists make a valuable, practical contribution to society. I imagine that a lot of us would be saying the same thing today. I know that that contribution is hard to define, but I think artists make a valuable, practical contribution to our society. However, Canada undervalues its artists. It may respect its artists, it may appreciate its artists, but it does not value its artists. When I say Canada, I mean you. I'm trying to be like direct and practical. I mean you. I mean the people that are sitting in this room. I mean me. I mean arts organizations. I mean arts funders. I mean arts presenters. I mean arts administrators. And I mean artists ourselves. We undervalue and marginalize our own art. Maybe not necessarily because we want to, but because it's the reality of our lives. So I want to tell you a story. I'll probably tell you a few stories. In March 2020, in what became the first wave of the pandemic, I made a decision. I'll tell you more about the decision a little bit later. On March the 14th, I went to performance at the Theatre Center with a group of people. On March the 15th, I closed the Kickstarter for an album project that I still have not completed. That evening, I started feeling sick. Remember, this is mid-March 2020. March 16th, I was shivering in bed. I still didn't know what it was. There was no test at that time. There was no vaccine at the time. I still cannot confirm exactly what I was sick with. March 17th, Ontario declared a state of emergency. I'm from Toronto. Later that week, Toronto declared a state of emergency. Through the spring of 2020, I was locked down alone in my apartment in Esplanade, that's in downtown Toronto. Staying away from people, from public places, listening to news every day for multiple hours. I've never been more isolated in my life. I struggle with depression. It wasn't fun. I was glad to have some time, but a lot of friends of mine, they didn't have the ability to be locked down. Friends of mine are nurses. Friends of mine work in grocery stores. Friends of mine had barbershops that they lost during the pandemic. Many people went into debt, as I said, lost their businesses. I was on CERB for 4 months. In the years since then, many people who worked with the arts, in the arts, left the arts. Many of those people were working class people. To be an artist in Canada is often a privilege. You have the ability to get through some times that other people may not have the ability to get through. Many people left the arts. So for artists that I know, the arts was precarious before the pandemic. Consistently precarious before the pandemic. And so the pandemic just times it by 100. We lost a lot of artists in the time of the pandemic. We lost many artists in the same way that we often lose artists to places like New York, Berlin, Lagos, LA, London, Johannesburg, Paris, these kinds of places, big cities with dense populations. Before COVID, I was kind of floundering as an artist. I had been on tour. I It looked good on the internet, but I would come back off a tour with like $1,000. I can't live for half a month on $1,000. So at a certain point, I decided to go back to school. While I was trying to get a master's, I was caregiving for a sick father who was, he had a major diagnosis. He almost died in that time. He's lying in bed right now. My parents are two of the first black filmmakers in Canada, Claire Prado and Roger McTear. Very precarious in relation to their pension. I was dealing with the loss of several friends. I won't name them all. A professor said in and around that time while I was trying to get through my schooling that maybe I should take leave. I said, if I leave, I'm not coming back. I don't have the ability to come back. In the middle of dealing with all of that, I was still debating on whether or not I was going to continue to attempt to be an artist. I handed in my thesis on my 40th birthday. That month, I put my bank card in at the grocery store, and it came back insufficient funds. I paid for my groceries with a credit card. That scared me. So how do I commit to my art? Or how does anybody in that situation commit to their art? If they or me or whoever is living in precarity, if the investment is low, if the investment is inconsistent, if the infrastructure isn't there. So that fall, I booked a lot of conversations around, you finish school. I started having conversations with people, booking meetings to have, to talk about what I was trying to do, all that kind of thing. I spoke to a lot of artists in that time, and I asked them, for the people that I perceived to be successful in what it was they were doing, I asked them, how are you doing this? How are you actually able to make this happen? Not a single one of them said that their primary income came from the art that they created. That's just people I know. That may not be the situation for everybody. Those are the people that I know. Artists ran cleaning businesses. Artists were professors in MFA programs. Artists were waitstaff. Artists work in grocery stores. Artists cut hair in barbershops. Artists did retail. Artists had day jobs. They did their art on the side as a hobby. Meanwhile, people who work full-time in the arts, artistic directors, executive directors, managing directors, arts administrators, arts funders, and artists that had the privilege, for a variety of different reasons, sometimes partners, sometimes parents, sometimes inheritance, sometimes institutions, to be able to actually continue their art without having to worry about that time where you're not necessarily making any profit. That is a long time for the majority of artists. And most people actually don't get through that time. So I'll say it again. I had a conversation with a friend of mine. He said there is no middle class in the arts. Michael Murray used to work at the Ontario Arts Council. He said there's no middle class in the arts. So this is the decision that I mentioned. In the middle of the day, I was in the bathroom, sitting on the toilet, scrolling Instagram, as one does. And I got a call from the Canadian government. And a woman I was introduced to in one of those networking conversations that I spoke about, she offered me a short-term contract. This is not what I wanted to do. As I said, all I ever wanted to be was an artist. I had to think about it. I didn't necessarily want to do it. I had several creative projects on the go that this kind of employment would probably hurt, but I didn't have much of a choice. So I called back the following day, and I accepted that job. I've been working there for 2 years now. If you speak to people in the government, a lot of them have the same story, right? Oh, I started in doing an internship. Oh, I started because I was just trying to get through this 3 months. Oh, I started da-da-da-da-da. Now I've been working here for 10 years, 5 years, 20 years, 25 years, that sort of thing. So I've been thinking a lot about what it means to be a working artist and that relationship with the sector. Because here's what artists don't necessarily tell you: how they live, what pays their rent, what pays their bills, what pays for their groceries, their food, how much debt they're in, how long it will take them to get out of that debt, who they care for, the toll that that takes. What is their health like? What is their mental health like? What is their financial health like? I thought for myself, how am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to take care of my father? What if my mother gets sick too? Am I sabotaging my quality of life? Am I sabotaging my stability? Am I sabotaging my ability to potentially retire one day? I'm 43 now. Artists often don't articulate this sacrifice. If artists, and particularly marginalized artists, working class artists, artists that are not in like the arts sector, don't get this, we won't see their contribution. We won't see their contribution. So this is why I said, I'm not sure that we value the artists. I don't mean in theory, I mean in practice. I'm not sure that we value the artists. Often arts organizations, they report one of three things. Number one, attendance, how many people showed up. Number two, frequency of presentation. How many times did this thing happen? And number three, profit. How much money did it generate? None of these have to do with the quality of the art, what it does in the community. None of this has to do with how many artists were actually doing that, or if any of those people could sustain themselves. If it is only presentation, or if anybody got development, production, those sorts of things. So what's not valued? How does art contribute to the city? How does art change people? So, how can arts and cultural organizations play an important role in moving art forward? This is the question that we were asked. Number one, pay artists. Don't just pay artists, but invest in the development of artists, their work over the long term. If you don't invest in artists, like any other investment, you won't get any kind of return. I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about all the various things that arts brings to any kind of a community or any group of people. Do not only pay for presentation, pay for exploration, development, time, rent, groceries, education, experiences, business development, financial literacy, intellectual property management, etc., etc. Pay for things that allow artists to grow their craft and their business and themselves. Look at your financial statements. What percentage of the money in your organization goes to artists? When does it go to them? What kind of artists? Maybe Black artists, women artists, indigenous artists, maybe a combination of all of those things at the same time. And when you do that kind of evaluation of identity, also now evaluate class. How does this compare to others in your organization or other things that your organization spends money on? What percentage of that money goes to artists specifically, especially around development? For instance, you can tell, I tell this to artists all the time, when you're being requested, I'm going over, I think. I tell this to artists all the time. When you're being requested by any kind of arts organization to do anything, look at their financial statements first. Compare that to how much they're paying you. You can do this with the city that you live in. For instance, Toronto's police spending is $400 per capita. Its arts spending just hit $25 per capita in 2018. They were talking about that for 6-7 years. You can do this with the entire Toronto budget, with the entire Halifax budget. You could do this with the budget for the Walrus. You could do all these kinds of things. If you don't have the budget to do a project, don't do it. Don't do it. If you don't have the budget, don't tell artists, we don't have the budget. Don't do the project. Find a way to be able to pay the people who are involved in it as best as you can. I'm going to skip forward. The main thing that I'm saying is invest in artists and invest in artists in the long term. That investment is a practical proof that you value the arts. Not in theory, but in practice. Thank you.